So, with all these benefits of happiness for both adults and children, and in both ordinary and spiritual pursuits, can you actually increase your happiness? And the answer is a definite yes. But let's get an important point out of the way. Happiness is not fundamentally about your circumstances. For example, there are lots of people with good circumstances who are unhappy, and lots of people in poor circumstances who experience great inner peace and contentment. For example, I have a friend who's traveled the world and he has said, "You know, Rick, the happiest people in the world are usually the poorest ones." Much research has shown that there is very little relationship, if any at all, between your circumstances and your happiness. For example, lottery winners and people who have suffered a crippling accident have been followed a year after this event. And what's interesting is that in each case, there is a change. In the beginning, lottery winners get very happy. In the beginning, people who've suffered a crippling accident tend to be, of course, very upset and worried and sad. But roughly a year later, in most cases, each of these people has basically returned to his or her original kind of resting state of happiness. So it's not really about the circumstances. It's fine to try to improve them. It's fine to have ambitions and long-range plans, of course. But ultimately, your happiness is mainly about how you experience those situations and the results of those plans, not on the situations and results themselves. Like everything else in life, unhappiness and happiness are the result of causes and conditions. If you change those causes and conditions, their results change as well. It's lawful, like the law of gravity, or the way that it's a lot easier to grow flowers in rich garden soil than in the cracks inside a parking lot. And of those causes and conditions that lead to happiness, the most influential ones are inside your own head. For example, the world is full of stones and thorns and sharp things that could hurt your feet. What should we do about it? On the one hand, we could cover the world with leather, changing the circumstances. On the other hand, we could put on a pair of shoes, working on the inside with our outlook. As a kid myself, I was raised by definitely loving and caring parents, but for a variety of reasons, I was pretty unhappy. But over the years, slowly but surely, there's been truly a fundamental sea change in my underlying sense of well-being. And this personal experience, which many, many other people have had, is corroborated by many scientific studies. There's a lot of research on how people actually increase their basic sense of happiness. In other words, they shifted over time the fundamental thermostat setting of their own happiness. And in fact, there are even measures of real changes in the brain as people become happier. Since everything we feel is based on underlying neurological activity, though, who knows, there could well also be some mysterious spiritual dimension involved, no one can prove it either way, that means that every experience you have of happiness actually changes your brain. And repeated experiences of happiness gradually can shift it in a more positive direction. In other words, the fleeting stream of consciousness leaves behind lasting marks on your brain, much like a spring shower leaves a trail of little gullies on a hillside. The reason for this change in the brain, sometimes called neuroplasticity, is that, quote, neurons that fire together wire together. This famous saying from the psychologist Donald Hebb refers to the fact that the activation of a particular neural circuit increases the strength of connections within that circuit. All this means that your experiences are important, not just because of their brief effects on your momentary subjective quality of life, but also because they produce enduring changes in the physical structures of your own brain. And these changes affect your well-being, functioning, and sometimes your physical health for days and decades to come, which of course affects others besides yourself. All this gives you a neurologically grounded and a moral reason to treat your own experience of living as if it truly matters. So let me give you a few examples of some of the research studies that show that happiness actually changes your own brain. First, there have been brain scans of monks who have meditated a great deal, and those have shown that the actual brainwave patterns of the happier monks and the ones who had meditated longer were characteristically different in important ways than those people who were not so happy. For example, the brainwaves of monks who had meditated a lot much more quickly returned to their resting state after they had been shown a very, very upsetting picture or had a loud and disturbing sound. Similarly, in further studies, research has shown that the left frontal lobes of your brain become stronger and more active relative to the right frontal lobes of your brain with people who are happier or who've done practices of happiness like meditation. That's important because the left frontal lobes of your brain promote positive states of mind, and the right frontal lobes tend to promote the negative emotions. Both are, of course, important to be able to have in life, which is why we evolved a brain, left-sided and right-sided, that can do those things. But on the other hand, most of us would prefer to have the happier emotions. And it's shown that happier people tend to have more tendency toward left frontal activation. As well, of course, there are lots of attitudes and skills that modern science is not yet able to detect inside the brain. In addition to these structural changes in the brain, there are other tiny molecular changes that occur that have to do with happiness in terms of key neurotransmitters and hormones. And I'm going to talk through 5 right now. First, serotonin is a key neurotransmitter involved in positive mood as well as sleep and digestion, which is why it's the main target of most antidepressants today. And various mental activities that promote happiness, meditation is a key example that's been studied, really do raise measurable levels of serotonin in the brain. A second neurotransmitter, dopamine, is deeply involved in the reward circuitry of the brain. To give you a feeling of its power, cocaine and other stimulant drugs bind to the receptors for dopamine in your brain, and the intensity of that rush that cocaine users report gives you a feeling for the power of dopamine in your brain, and its levels also rise when you increase your positive experiences. Third, a key neurotransmitter and hormone called norepinephrine increases in your brain when it's energized by the more enthusiastic or excited aspects of happiness. And norepinephrine has a global effect in that it alerts the brain to new information coming in, which is why it's very useful to activate or increase more norepinephrine in the brain if you want to learn anything or teach anything to people. That kind of general orienting response tells the brain altogether, hey, important information is coming in. Pay attention and take it in. All right, fourth, oxytocin, very important hormone released in nursing mothers, but also present in men and women who are not nursing as well. But to give you a feeling of its kind of soothing, loving, connecting feeling, that chemical is released in your brain when you're doing the kind of happy things that are more loaded with feelings of love and sweetness, like giving someone you love a long, long hug. Again, we see that those chemicals in the brain increase with emotions that are positive and happy. And then last, of course, is the endorphins. These are kind of opiate-like, naturally occurring chemicals in the brain that are released when we're doing something that makes us happy. The key takeaway point here is that there are lots of tools in the toolbox, both that affect the general neurological circuitry of your brain as well as the tiny, tiny biochemicals in it. Lots of tools that you can use to affect your own brain and nudge it in a happier direction. If one tool doesn't work that great for you, and that's normal, or even has problems with it, no problem, just try another one. And this idea alone that you have resources, that you have options, that you've got lots of tools in the toolbox, itself promotes happiness by undermining pessimism, learned helplessness, and even despair. To quote Viktor Frankl, an Auschwitz survivor who came out of the concentration camps, quote, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember those who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way."